everybody. Welcome into the Longwood Communication Studies Department live senior original research streaming presentations. I am your host, Dr. Ryan Stouffer, and joining me today is Dr. Alec Hosterman, and we are proud to have mentored all the presentations you were going to see today. And so we'll tell you a little bit about the research they did in a second. But first of all, this event here is coming, of course, Corona edition. We're safely social distance here. So coming to you live from the Communication Studios in French Hall, but sadly, without any students behind the scenes. Normally, this is a student-produced program here. This is the fourth time we've done this, and usually we get to have students behind the camera. So today, we want to give a shout-out to Dr. Awesome, Mr. Clinton Wright behind the scenes, who has taken the place of the 8 students that normally run this broadcast. And so while it's not student-produced this year, it still features a bunch of student original research here. And the students in my class did quantitative research, so they were looking for larger patterns using numbers here. So they all crafted original surveys, collected around 100 results, some even up to 200 responses to those surveys, had calculated significance testing for their hypothesis, and then discussed whether they found significance in the results or didn't, and kind of share those results with you. Dr. Hossman's class took a little bit different direction here. I'll let him tell you a little about that.
Qualitative research is a little bit different than quant. We sit down and actually did interviews with our participants. Originally, they were going to be face-to-face interviews, but of course, life interceded. So we used things like Zoom and phone conversations. And what we did was we looked at themes throughout our interviews to come up with some sort of thematic analysis of our interviews. In other words, we're looking at the quality of the information to pull out what was the most important. That's how they did their interviews and their research.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Hossman. So shortly here, all the presentations are going to join us via Zoom today, and we're going to get to see their faces, hear their voices, and get to see the PowerPoints that are kind of presenting their research too. So we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes here, so stick around and enjoy some original research.
I don't know who you're supposed to be, but deep in my heart you'll always be. No weapon formed against me. I know you're always there.
everyone. My name is Sutton Reekes, and alongside me is my research partner, Jennifer Hall. Our research study today is about whether cancel culture can be canceled in the wake of micro-celebrity scandals. Next slide, please. For our research topic, we questioned whether micro-celebrity scandals affected consumers' perceptions of the micro-celebrity after the scandal diminished. A micro-celebrity is defined as one who gains significant following through digital media, as stated by Digit Magazine, which is a digital culture magazine. Today, a micro-celebrity scandal will result in the cancellation of that micro-celebrity, which means the micro-celebrity will be viewed negatively for having done something viewed as morally, ethically, or physically wrong. Next slide, please.
The theories we used to dive further into our research were identity management theory, image repair theory, and identity. So identity management theory states that people view their identities differently in different times and situations, meaning that our identities are not stagnant and tend to change. So in addition to this, image repair theory is the way that people, and in our case, micro-celebrities, apologize and conduct crisis communication following a scandal. Image repair theory includes 5 different response types, including denial, evasion of responsibility, reducing offensiveness, corrective action, and mortification. Next slide, please. For our methodology, we first hypothesized that micro-celebrity scandals people's perceptions of the person or content. As for our second hypothesis, we predicted that people would have a more lenient view of the scandal and the micro-celebrity if an apology is issued. Our independent variable was represented by the stimuli shown in the form of screenshots, and our dependent variable was the participants' perceptions pre-scandal, post-scandal, and post-apology. For over a week, participants were asked to complete our survey, and the survey was posted 14 different times on different social networking sites. Due to the nature of our study, our questions were our own original creation using a Likert scale, and we used screenshots of information pertaining to different micro-celebrity scandals. Overall, we had 139 responses to our survey, with the majority of respondents being between 18 and 23 years old and overwhelmingly female. Next slide, please.
First hypothesis was supported. The results showed that people's perceptions of the micro-celebrities ranked lower than they initially did before being exposed to the scandal. Our second hypothesis was not supported, as the difference was not statistically significant. The results showed that consumers' perceptions were negative post-scandal and then slightly less negative post-apology. Next slide, please. For H1, our research supported the identity management theory. The micro-celebrity, the scandal, and the person outside of fame were all in the celebrity identity. This brings major repercussions to micro-celebrities. To a micro-celebrity, it is not only your online persona that is disliked during a scandal, but you as the micro-celebrity, your content, and your overall personality. Comparatively, our H2 was rejected. The results showed that immediately following the scandal, people did not like the micro-celebrity. Furthermore, post-apology and later in time, people ended up liking the micro-celebrity only slightly more. The micro-celebrity issuing an apology later on did change the perceptions of people, and consumers were more lenient on the micro-celebrity, yet their perceptions were not significantly more positive. These results are varying for different reasons. Seeing that apologies did not create a difference in people's perception or leniency can be shocking. Cancel culture is an intimidating facet of the technological age, and that fear is only magnified, seeing that despite admitting a mistake and taking ownership, many micro-celebrities may still remain canceled in consumers' minds. Next slide, please.
For our research, we questioned consumers' initial perception of a micro-celebrity, their perception post-scandal, and their perceptions post-apology. Our survey was only able to question consumers' thoughts shortly after one another, which is why a limit of our research is that we are unable to tell whether people really still dislike the micro-celebrity after the fact, or if the initial post-scandal perception was still lingering after viewing their apology. In addition, our study was limited due to preconceived perceptions of the micro-celebrity and their scandal, as well as self-reporting biases. During the study, it's possible that fans of the micro-celebrities took our survey and saw the scandals and perception of the micro-celebrity through a lens of bias and skewed our results. Next slide, please. There are many ways to look at cancel culture further and in more detail. First, although our study only used screenshots of scandals and apologies, it could be concluded that a qualitative study and a repetitive study over time could be more representative to see the differences in consumer perceptions using the original YouTube videos containing the actual scandals and apologies as stimuli rather than screenshots. Secondly, showing the different apology types relating to image repair theory could also show the differences in cancel culture beliefs and perceptions as new ways of micro-celebrity apologies begin to become used. In conclusion, we found that scandals significantly impacted consumers' views of micro-celebrities, and while consumers' perceptions slightly improved over time with the presence of an apology, that change was not significant, and it seems that cancel culture will likely not be canceled in the near future. Thank you for listening to our research.
Of your own set to never-ending love inside of you. Love poured out for my weakness. Oh. I've been waiting for you to come. I've been longing for you, I know. And I've been saying forever you've been on my mind. I've been waiting for you too long to see that you're the
Hello, everyone. My name is Morgan Peroulas. My research partner, Isabella Naccarato, and I researched the effect of music in interpersonal and intrapersonal relationships. Next slide, please.
We wanted to find the connection between music and the formation of private groups, and we aimed to identify whether or not music is a key component to the formation of private groups. We wanted to know the how and why, the emotional ties to music, as well as how music helps people relate to others. We came up with 3 research questions. To what extent is music an important aspect of group formation? How do people who listen to similar genres of music connect? And in what ways can people who have differing musical interests connect? The importance of our research is to make the connection between how groups are formed from musical interests. Next slide, please.
For the foundational research, we based it on two theories. The first being self-disclosure theory, which discusses how people who share a common interest are more likely to share information about themselves to others. The second theory was dynamic social impact theory, which discussed how people clustered together with others who share similar interests to form a culture. We relied on various literature to help support our research, and two of the most profound studies were by Sittler, Cooper, and Montag, which discussed how empathy is linked to our emotional responses to music, and the second is by Boer and Abu Bakar, which discussed how culture and listening to music can have an effect on the emotional development of young people, as well as family and peer cohesion. Next slide, please.
We had a total of 12 participants, 7 female and 5 male. The criteria for our participants were to be between the ages of 18 and 25 and students at a mid-sized East Coast university. We conducted our interviews both face-to-face and via FaceTime. Next slide, please. We noticed 6 overarching trends throughout all of our interviews. The first trend being that music can be a way to bring people together. 7 participants stated that they have formed relationships based on their musical preferences and overall interest in music. 3 participants noted that they have created relationships on the internet that relate to music as well as by attending concerts. The second trend was that people who grew up listening to music grew a larger passion for music later in life. All participants stated that they have been influenced by music from a young age and later began to form their own preferences and interests starting in middle and high school. Next slide, please. Music is a form of expression. Most participants stated that the music they listen to often reflects the mood they are in, whether it be happy, sad, or angry. One participant stated, music is a way to express yourself with your opinions, just like clothing.
Our fourth trend stated that not all relationships are dependent on music. This fourth trend differed from our initial first trend, which stated that music is a way to bring people together. 4 participants had not made relationships based on music, and while these participants did say that music can affect closeness of relationships, it does not have to. Next slide, please. Our fifth trend noted parent preferences and home life influence. All participants expressed memories of music being played at home growing up, and 2 of these participants had at least one parent who played an instrument or was in a band. Our sixth and final trend noted a tendency for participants to want to please others with music choice. 7 participants noted changes of music choice when around others, and these 7 participants also stated they are more likely to cater to others' music preferences when around them. Next slide, please. These trends lended themselves to our 3 points of discussion. The first point being that music is a form of expression. As stated earlier, music can often match participants' moods, and participants feel that they can share their feelings with others through music. This music also lends to people wanting to please others through that music choice. Our second point of discussion relates to music and group formation. People can come together over a common interest such as music, but not all relationships are dependent on this music. And people often tend to base their group formation on personal attributes related to genre or artist. Our last point of discussion is the early influence of music. People often pursue hobbies or careers later in life based on this early influence of music. And people can form emotional dependencies from music genre or artists, such as liking pop music or maybe liking an artist like Taylor Swift. And they may gravitate towards people with those same interests. And lastly, parental influence in early life does impact how people view music later in life and how groups can form. Next slide, please.
We came across 3 limitations to our research. First, due to extenuating circumstances, we lack participant variety. We were unable to randomly select our participants using visual markers and selected them based on the people that we knew. This could skew the data and the results. We were unable to conduct all of our interviews face-to-face, which made it difficult to note physical responses to the interview questions and overall demeanor. Our last limitation was that we believe our second research question should have been altered. It primarily focused on genre of music, but we would have altered it to be broader to include genre, artist, and the decade in which the music came out. Next slide, please.
We have a few suggestions for future research for anyone researching this topic. Our first suggestion is to choose random participants. We would choose these based on visual markers in a communal location, which would allow for a wider variety of participants and their interests to give more general results. Our second suggestion is to research how people connect without music. This information could further gauge the importance of music or lack thereof in people's relationships. And our final suggestion is to take a more quantitative approach to this research. Gaining statistical information would help through the Likert scale as a tool of measurement that could provide a more objective or uniform set of data that would be easier to interpret. In conclusion, while we have found that music is a component of the formation of interpersonal and intrapersonal relationships, music is not a defining factor of these relationships. Thank you for listening to our research.
Love I can't refuse, standing firm for you, only you. The darkness of this age, aching for my mind. I need your strength to wade through the fight. Oh. Send me the light, send me the light of love. Send me the light, send me the light to come. Want my heart, you want mine. Spirit come, fall on us. In your presence, God, I can't quite get enough. Breathing in your spirit, grace it fills my lungs. Heaven's moment swept the darkness, lit my soul. Coming alive, I am alive in you. Freedom rise, your spirit makes us new. Open eyes, your midst brings life. Send me the light, send me the light, oh. In your presence, God, I can't quite get enough. Breathing in your spirit, grace it fills my lungs. Heaven's moment swept the darkness.
Good afternoon. My name is Baylee Nunnally, and this past semester, I spent the entire time researching the role of media on law enforcement officers and their daily interactions. Next slide, please. So the research topic was based on surveying law enforcement, so it was a little bit more difficult to conduct the survey. The two hypotheses I had was the amount of news media on law enforcement is going to affect their demeanor, and also the more media that is consumed by law enforcement, the more negative experiences they are going to expect from the public. So how does the media portray law enforcement? In a second, I'm going to show you two examples of two very different ways that the media can skew a story. And then how does it change the attitude of going into work in a community? I've got a few other researchers that I'm also going to show you that kind of back up and led my research this way. Next slide, please. So this first one that I have is a story that was in California, and it was put online by CNN, and it talks about California police investigating after a viral video shows a deputy punching a teen. Well, upon this story title, you can see that it does skew the story very negative towards law enforcement. After reading the story, though, you can understand that the teen was running away, resisting arrest, and many other things that led to the law enforcement officer having to take these measures into his own hands and use his discretion to obtain this citizen. Next slide, please. This story is a positive story. An ice cream shop and sheriff, they partner up together. They deliver a milkshake an hour away to a terminally ill Virginia woman. This is very positive. This is talking about the law enforcement going into the community and being a helping hand, being helpful, and being nice and pleasant to work with. All right, next slide, please. The two theories that led my research was symbolic interactionism theory. This basically means that people give a symbolic meaning to something and then that relays into their behavior. The next theory was social exchange theory. This is the exchange process between two people with emphasis on cost of interaction and social environment. This can be relevant for people that live in different parts of the country. You might be in a crime-filled neighborhood or you might be in a very safe neighborhood. But the exchange process between the law enforcement and the public itself is what was being viewed. Next slide, please. I had 4 pieces of literature that really led my project. From the beginning, the one that stood out the most to me was the one by Pickett. It was in 2018. This was the only survey that I could find that was relevant to the same topic, but also focused on just surveying law enforcement. Law enforcement is notably very hard to get to participate in surveys just because so much of their data before has been put in a negative light or has made them seem racist or other things like that has been placed and labeled because of it. So the fact that Pickett has done this before is what made me think, okay, this is possible for me to not survey the public, but instead survey law enforcement. The other one that stood out the most to me was the survey by Dyllan. This concluded something that is also included in my limitations, basically saying that if you lived in a crime-filled neighborhood, that's going to skew how you view the law enforcement, meaning you have grown up in a neighborhood that's full of crime, you've grown up seeing many law enforcement officers having to arrest or interact with the community in ways that aren't always positive. Versus living in a crime-free neighborhood, something like, small town where people have more of a relationship versus law enforcement versus only needing them when something is going wrong. Basically, this just said that if you lived in the crime-filled neighborhood, distrust equals the treatment that they're going to get. Next slide, please. So the methodology for this was only to serve law enforcement, and any responses from the public could not be recorded. Immediately, if you were to enter the survey, it would kick you out if you answered, no, I am not law enforcement. 2, the way that we were going to share this was going to be through Facebook groups with thousands of officers in them. I myself, being a crim minor, had access to many students that have graduated from Longwood. I utilized them that have gone and pursued careers in law enforcement, as well as having a family of law enforcement and sharing it with their department. Likert questions were asked. They focused around expected treatment from the public and how they could feel themselves changing after they viewed media. Next slide, please. The first trend that I got is that it can be concluded that the media does affect how officers feel that they are treated from the public, but they don't change their demeanor on it based on their portrayal, knowing that, I took this oath to be a fair citizen and to protect my jurisdiction. The second trend is that strongly agree and agree categories were combined at the end of it because they did kind of reach the same kind of opinion to get 84% of the officers feeling that the public is persuaded to feel one way from the media coverage. And that can be seen from the 2 examples I had at the beginning. Next slide, please. Here's the Fox News saying basically the discussion is that it wasn't very relevant what sources people got their media from. And the next slide, please. And here are the limitations that were the biggest. COVID-19 canceled many of the Facebook pages that I was part of to share the survey with. So I was only able to get 94 responses. And out of the 94, only 81 were law enforcement. There was also no questions about social media, and it was news media only. And as we all know, social media can affect people's opinion. And next slide, please. So for future research, I would apply this and create a survey with the exact same questions, but give them to the public. I would also think it'd be interesting to see the difference between race, region, and age. And then for the news outlets, I would also go ahead and look and see how each news outlet that is answered as they're getting their media from, how that affects their opinion. Thank you for this. I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I did, and have a good rest of your day.
Spirit, open our hearts, Lord, pour it upon us. Oh, come awaken us to your spirit. Open our hearts, Lord, open our hearts, Lord. Oh, come awaken us to your spirit. Open our hearts, Lord, pour it upon us. Oh, come awaken us to your spirit. Open our hearts, Lord, Lord, Lord. Let your light shine through, illuminate the darkness. Flashes of grace around us. I can't contain it, for you have called us to give out the love you gave us. Lift high the name of Jesus. We give it all to you. Let your light shine through, illuminate the darkness. Flashes of grace around us. I can't contain it, for you have called us to give out the love you gave us. Lift high the name of Jesus. We give it all to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mason Patrick, and my partner here is Julia Bogdan. Our topic is why college students choose to join Greek organizations or not. Greek life has been a staple of American college life for many years. However, the preference to join a Greek organization is something that has always been unclear. It is not something that is thoroughly studied, especially not through a qualitative lens. Next slide, please.
So, the desire to join a Greek organization on a college campus is a communication phenomenon and is important to the communication discipline because there is currently a very limited amount of positive and even neutral research regarding Greek life. The present research and scholarly articles on Greek organizations typically reflect the negative aspects like drinking or hazing. So, we wanted to figure out why people were drawn to join these groups. Therefore, for our research question, we asked, what are the reasons why a college student would choose to join or not to join a Greek organization? Next slide, please. The first theory we use in our research is the elaboration likelihood theory by Richard E. Petty and John Cacioppo. This theory is essentially the extensive evaluation of messages in elaborate ways. There are two routes of making decisions within this theory: the central route, where people are persuaded by the content of the message, and the peripheral route, where people are persuaded by something other than the content of the message. The second theory we use is a message interpretation theory by Renee Edwards, which essentially clarifies why individuals assign certain meanings to stimuli and the process behind it. For example, what do students think when they hear "Go Greek"? Next slide, please.
So we interviewed 12 participants in total through face-to-face interviews and through Zoom calls once we were moved online due to COVID-19. Out of our 12 participants, 10 were members of a Greek organization and 2 were independent of any Greek-affiliated organization. Other similar characteristics of our participants included the size of their school. Every participant is currently attending or has attended a small to mid-sized university. Therefore, the data discovered reflects the views and opinions of Greek involvement at a small to mid-sized university. Once the face-to-face interviews were complete, our research team worked hard by re-listening and re-watching the filmed interviews in order to transcribe the interviews verbatim. To begin our analysis, we thoroughly analyzed the transcripts from all of our interviews and highlighted key phrases and terms that were used or mentioned often. Then we went more in depth into understanding how their initial interaction with the Greek-affiliated organization affected their opinion on joining or not. Next slide, please. Throughout our interviews, there were 2 significant reasons that affected why students decided to join Greek organizations. The first factor was students joined because of the desire to become more involved and to get to know more people at their school. For instance, Olivia Murray, a Greek senior, said, "I wanted to become more involved on campus and I really loved the idea behind the sisterhood." while another Greek senior, Nujian, said, "I was just looking for different ways to become more involved." Furthermore, as mentioned in the theory section, we found that our participants used both the peripheral route and the central route when deciding whether or not to join Greek life. Additionally, almost all of our interviewees claimed to join because of the people that were involved in the desired organization. 7 out of our 12 participants mentioned 1 or 2 people that specifically caused them to join their organization. The overall biggest factor for men and women to not join a Greek-affiliated organization was the concern for being hazed. As a part of this hazing, the students expressed the concern for being forced to drink. Benjamin Shuley, a junior at Longwood University, said in general, people believe that fraternity men drink all day and night, so that was definitely a major concern when deciding to rush. However, all participants contributed to this concern to the national perception of Greek life. All participants mentioned the media and society's perception of Greek organizations as influencing their thoughts. Joshua Dameron, a junior at Longwood University, claimed that it wasn't fair that unrelated fraternities at other schools damaged the reputations of all Greek members. All participants stated the Greek members were the biggest student leaders on campus. In his final comments, Joshua said, "It is not right that the media never features the thousands of dollars we raise for philanthropic organizations or the hours we spend on community service. But if we were to haze a student, it would be all over the news." We learned that this situation seemed to be the perfect example of judging a book by its cover. Greek-affiliated organizations are being shamed in the media and press, but on the campuses that our participants come from, students involved in Greek life are staying safe and breaking the stigma. Next slide, please.
In conclusion, this research study is significantly important because it has not been done before. At the end of the study, we were able to find why exactly people are drawn to join Greek life despite the negative outlook on it. This study could benefit chapters and Greek organizations on college campuses because Greeks can more thoroughly understand which messages are getting across to their audiences. 100% of our participants mentioned a negative opinion on Greek life from the media, affecting their thoughts and opinions on wanting to join. So, chapters can also target the perceptions created by the media by explaining and emphasizing how many organizations have hazing policies and how it does not align with the organizational values. Next slide, please. Some limitations to our current study would be the coronavirus pandemic of 2020, beginning in late March. We originally wanted to do focus groups, but instead had to do video calls and limit our face-to-face interviews. Additionally, campus was shut down, which is a severe limitation for us because students were forced to go back home, leaving us with less and less participants. Additionally, the library was inaccessible, severely limiting the research we were able to do. The last limitation we dealt with was a less diverse participant pool. Therefore, we had to stick to Longwood students only, not allowing us to understand how Greek life is on other campuses. Next slide, please. In the future, this is a study that could be recreated and could be really beneficial to campuses and communities. In order for that to happen, our research team recommends doing focus groups. Therefore, the research team could understand the group dynamic and participants could bounce ideas off of one another. Next, we also very much recommend larger participant numbers. Within the upcoming research study, the research team needs to understand the dynamics in more specificity and discover even better the underlying reasons. We also recommend interviewing more non-Greeks in order to gain more differing opinions and learn better reasons as to why they choose not to join. Lastly, we would recommend interviewing a less convenient participant pool in order to connect and research a larger range of people to see if we would gain differing and more accurate results, and perhaps even getting a more accurate theoretical result determining which route people might take. Thank you so much for your time today.
Pieces of my soul withdrew, colored in a state brand new. Now that I know the truth, my heart is alive in you. Pieces of my soul withdrew, colored in a state brand new. Now that I know the truth, my heart is alive in you. Something's coming over me. Yes, something's coming over me. Yes, something. Something's coming over me. Yes, something's coming over me. Let it rise. Let it rise.
Hi, my name is Sierra Clark, and this is my partner Dyllan Gowin, and our research topic is called Influence Persuasion, What is Shipped to Your Door? Next slide, please.
We decided to focus on Instagram influencers because of the prominence of lifestyle influencers on Instagram, especially all social media websites. And we also decided to look at the purchasing decisions because of how shopping online is becoming more popular. And what we looked at was the links that influencers provided and whether or not Instagram users use those links for the easy access. And then we also decided to look at large and small companies and whether users were more inclined to buy based on whether they came from a large or small company. And then we also looked at the algorithm that Instagram puts you in to see whether people followed influencers based on the similarities. Next slide.
So we used 3 theories to conduct our research. The first theory we used is social identity theory, which can be defined as how you develop your own identity through the people around you or the people you spend the most time with. The second theory we used was social influence theory. Social influence theory is defined as how you can be influenced by people who you may not know. So in our case, lifestyle influencers on Instagram. The third theory we used is consumer behavior theory. Consumer behavior theory can be defined as how people buy specific products and what leads them to buying those specific products. Next slide, please.
For our methodology, we only focused on lifestyle Instagram influencers, and we obtained our participants by creating a survey and posting our survey on Instagram. We posted our survey on Instagram 6 times in 1 week, and we as well put it in our bios. We together have a followers combined of 4,000 people, and we got 178 participants from all of our followers. And 2 of those participants were not usable answers. So after that, we looked into depth to the research. Next slide.
So for our results, we found that we were correct in one, which was when lifestyle Instagram influencers share or post products, then followers be more inclined to buy those specific products. And if you look at the image above, you can see an influencer's post and how she tagged products in the picture. The second hypothesis we did was when lifestyle Instagram influencers share or post products, then followers be more likely to purchase the product from a smaller company, which we found to be incorrect. If you look at the images at the bottom of the screen, you can see 3 influencers with sponsorships from large companies where the influencers are paid to talk about these companies. Next slide, please.
What we learned was that Instagram users primarily follow lifestyle influencers on Instagram with the intentions to gain ideas from them. And then our research showed that those who use the Like to Know It app, which is an app that most influencers use to share links to their products, those users were more inclined to purchase products that they shared. And then we also found that those same users were more inclined to purchase a product when it was from a larger company rather than a smaller company. And we also found that a majority of our participants were finding their influencers through the popular page, which is put together by Instagram and the algorithms based on who you follow, what you like, and the people that you follow are the things you post. Next slide.
So we ran into some limitations with our research. The first one is we only asked one demographic question, which was, are you above 18? Due to legal reasons. If we were able to do this again, we may look at other ages, especially younger, because that's the majority of the population on Instagram. Also, a lot of people don't know what the Like to Know It app is, so that was a limitation. We could have done a better job explaining it on our survey. And lastly, we only got 176 participants to generalize for the whole population, which is definitely not enough to generalize for everyone who follows a lifestyle influencer, but at least we could generalize for our research. Next slide, please.
For future research, we would like to look into genders and who buys more via Instagram, because we definitely think there's more females rather than males who purchase online. And then we would also like to look at the age group, because the influencers are usually the same age and they all are together, the ones who share their products on Instagram, and they share products and tag their other fellow influencers on there. So we think that looking at which age groups do follow those certain influencers would be interesting. And then as well as focusing on different type of influencers, where during our research, Cierra was always more
influenced by the fitness influencers, where I was more influenced by the fashion influencers. So I think it would be interesting to look at the differences between that. And as well as asking more detailed questions on our surveys, getting more into what the item is that people are purchasing and how likely they were to purchase it. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I've seen your face, streaming brightness in the blur. All around, it lights the way. Melodic motion, clearing cloud to keep me straight. You by my side, you carry me home, me home. I don't know who you're supposed to be, but deep in my heart you'll always be. No weapon formed against me. I know you're always there. I'll always know you're there. Will you ever fail me? Are you the everlasting one? Will you ever fail me? Oh, you have never failed me. Are you the all-consuming love? You have never failed me. Oh, I don't know who you're supposed to be, but deep in my heart you'll always be. No weapon formed against me. I know you're always there. I'll always know you're still wandering to a light unseen, never-ending distance with you and me. I'm on my knees, waiting for you, waiting for you. A far existence now here for me to close the gap in between. A whispering, I'm listening.
Hi everyone, my name is Megan Ailstock, and my partner and I, Kristen Martwinski, did our research on how social media views Christianity and its followers. Our research question was, how is social media modernizing the modern Christian woman? Next slide, please.
So we examined how social media influences the young Christian's self-image, marriage and relationship expectations, as well as the millennial and Gen Z attitudes and result to influencers. An example of some of the more popular influencers that we've looked at that are the most popular among this demographic are the LeBron family, which is a vlogging channel on YouTube that follows a young married couple with their 2 or 3 children, and Duck Dynasty, which is a reality TV show which follows another Christian family in the South, and their focuses on their Christian values as well as their Southernness. The and how that these influencers can portray an unrealistic lifestyle. Next slide, please.
So our first theory we used was the media ecology theory. This theory aims to understand the social impact of technology and communication. It also applies to social media, and this theory can also influence people based on their emotions, and it can create an understanding of value for certain things. Next slide, please.
Another theory that we looked at is the social learning theory by B.F. Skinner in 1954. This focuses on learning processes and behaviors that can be acquired by imitating others' actions as well as observing them. This can also be applied to social media. Next slide, please.
For our methodology, we interviewed 10 Christians between the ages of 18 and 25. They were 9 females and 1 male. They were interviewed and asked 10 questions, and the interviews were about 15 to 20 minutes long. After that, the interviewers then transcribed the interviews and then found the similarities and differences that were examined. Next slide, please.
The theme one that we found in the results was in our married participants. There was only one participant who was married, and that by focusing on the married versus non-married individuals, we were able to distinguish people's views on marriage as a young person. The one person who was married identified themselves as a religious Christian, meaning that they attend church weekly or prayer daily. The second theme that we looked at was someone who was married, someone who knew someone who was married at a young age. Every single participant except one knew someone who was married at a young age. This focus, because we did this, so we could focus on how many people knew young couples and also ask them what were the reasons for this marriage and were they religious reasons. 6 out of the 10 participants said that the reasons for the marriage were religious. And one even said that the person that they knew was pressured into being married by 20 so they could grow in their faith with a partner. Next slide, please.
So for theme 3, we labeled that as participants who labeled themselves as religious Christians. Out of all the participants identified, as 75% of them were religious Christians. One participant said that they were moderate when defining themselves as religious Christians, and another participant said that she goes back and forth between going to church every Sunday, but praying daily is something that she does. For theme 4, we said that we labeled it as who would want to obtain the influencer's lifestyle. So one participant said that she follows the LeBryant family because she is inspired by their family and the religious goals that they have in life. Another participant said that she follows Christian musicians and she follows them because she wants to surround herself with things that will build her up and grow her relationship with Christ. Next slide, please.
For the discussion, the participants who followed these faith influencers wanted to attain a similar lifestyle to those influencers. When following these faith influencers, it means that they want to stay abstinent until marriage, get married at a young age, and raise their children in a Christian household, similar to the way the faith influencers raise their children. The research question hypothesis, we're trying to see how social media is affecting the modern Christian woman and how they view marriage and their role in the home. The 60% of our participants follow the same faith influencers. That was the Colorism family. Many of them did want to be like them, believing them to be true to what they were saying. Although one of our participants thought that they were ingenuine in their portrayal of their faith, but the majority of our participants believe that they were the ideal family and what most Christian women should strive for to have their family be like. Next slide, please.
So for our limitations, we said honesty. There was no way of knowing if participants were actually telling us the truth. The next one was the number of participants. Because of unforeseen circumstances, we were unable to reach the amount of participants we would have rather interviewed. And lastly, previous research. There was little to none research done about this specific topic. Next slide, please.
For future research, I think it could be beneficial for more research to be done on gender roles in Christian relationships. There wasn't that much research done on that, and I think that would have been good information to have when starting this research process. looking into sex before marriage, and more research should be done on how teaching only abstinence affects the average age Christians get married, and how the way the church portrays the way you should have a courting process and get married. I think also that we also believe that studies should be done to examine Christian women who identify as feminists and how that aligns or doesn't align with the faith. Next slide, please.
First one.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much for watching our presentation.
Nothing now to lose. Standing firm in you, only in you. Stay alert and persistent, seeking words to pray the way you do. I wanna live for you alone. In the night, I can sense your spirit. 'Cause you give me strength. Your will my soul pursue. Nothing now to lose. Standing firm in you, only in you. Cause you give me strength. Your will my soul pursues. A love I can't refuse. Standing firm for you, only in you. The darkness of this age, aching for my mind. I need your strength to wade through the fight. Oh.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. It's nice to speak to you all again, albeit under different circumstances. And for my research, I did it on famous athletes and their use of social media. Next slide, please. How celebrity athletes market themselves on social media. Obviously, before doing this research, I wanted to do something that would incorporate my love of sports and, the fast growing world of social media. I feel like you take something two somewhat polarizing topics, you take social media and athletes, they both reach an insane amount of people, and you put those two together and you could get something crazy. By conducting this survey, I wanted to find out whether or not the number of athletes you follow on social media has any impact on the purchases you make. Celebrity athletes maintain a massive following and can influence purchases made by people online. Celebrity athlete endorsements can make an impact on their followers. You see it more and more today. More celebrity athletes are creating their own brand. They're pushing something. They want to get their name out there. Next slide, please. And the theory and literature that I used to really push the survey, it was the main focal point of really steering it, was a social identity theory. Breaks down the cognitive steps that overlap with social identity and how the behavior impacts. So basically, why do people act the way they are? Like, what do they identify as? Media cultivation theory. Breaking down media, social media, movies, pop culture, just breaking all that down and seeing why people are so influenced and why they have such a big affinity for these different types of things. These theories assisted in the analysis of how celebrity athletes gain such influential power and why people tend to follow their trends, because today, athletes like LeBron James, Neymar, they have millions, 50 plus million followers on Instagram, and that's such a huge amount of following. Next slide, please. The methodology that I used was, for starters, the age range. For the purpose of this study, I recorded the answers of those in the 18 to 24 age range. The reason why I narrowed it to that was I was mainly going for college students, or at least college age students, because if you look at it, that's mostly it's mostly the people that are going to be on Instagram, Twitter. It's going to be that age group, and I feel like they would be more prone to make purchases. Sneakers, jerseys, T-shirts, any kind of sports memorabilia. I'm one of those people. I've spent a fair amount of money on sports memorabilia, but in order to reach this age range, I tweeted out the link. I put it on my Snapchat story. I put it out on various forms of social media just to so I could reach the most amount of people I could. To scale the answers, I utilize a Likert scale to find out why they made their purchases, which is I would ask them a question, and you either strongly disagree or you strongly agree or you're somewhere in the middle. Survey questions. The survey questions put in the survey were all original questions. These questions fit the survey's purpose. I wanted to know how many athletes you follow, how many purchases you've made. Did these athletes make you, not make you, but did they drive you? Did they make you want to make that purchase? Next slide, please. The results, the first hypothesis proved to be wrong. There is no significant evidence between the number of online purchases and the number of athletes followed on social media. Those who followed celebrity athletes weren't as prone to make an online purchase due to the amount of athletes they followed. Basically, I was kind of taken back by that because I felt like, say this person follows 10 to 15 athletes and this person doesn't follow nearly as many. Say they only follow 3. The results of the survey basically said that the amount of athletes that they followed didn't make a difference. The second hypothesis, the numbers were a bit more supportive and showed there was significance between a celebrity athlete and endorsing an item online, and someone being more susceptible to purchase that item. Those who made online purchases made them due to brand affinity or because of who promoted the product. Next slide, please. The first trend, famous athletes garner a huge following online and in their respective sports, but the number of athletes people follow, it doesn't affect the amount of online purchases they make. As crazy that is to say. The second trend, these athletes are able to push their brand and likeness through social media, showing the correlation between an athlete endorsing a brand and the consumers being more susceptible to purchase it. Next slide, please. The limitations I came across were the amount of responses. I had to put the link out a couple times to reach the target of 100, but I eventually got 105. Empty responses, there were some empty responses that had to be deleted. Some of the responses were deleted because of the respondent's age, or they just said that they hadn't made any purchases or they didn't follow any athletes. And you can't always expect 100% truthfulness in an online survey. I'm not face to face with the person, so who's to say that that person wasn't lying about some of the numbers? Next slide, please. Future research, maybe focus on just one medium of social media. Maybe just focus on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook instead of focusing on all of them. And if I were to do this again, I would want to see how many of the purchases are just sneaker related, because basketball players are all pushing a sneaker and they all have a shoe brand. Thank you guys for tuning in and miss you guys.
Hi, thank you guys for watching. So I'm Matthew Carpenter. I'm presenting with my partner, Miranda Farley, on what factors lead to career path decisions. What makes people decide what they want to do later on. Next slide, please. All right. So what factors contribute to a young adult's career path decision? That was our research question this semester. So the first thing are expectations and obligations to follow a certain path after high school. So society that they grew up in or the family that they grew up with all have expectations that contribute to what they are going to do later on. So prior jobs or life experiences, all of these experiences contribute to what they help them develop what they like and don't like. And lastly, experiences during college help guide people a certain direction. All right, next slide, please.
The theory we chose for our research topic is uncertainty reduction theory. According to this theory, people tend to be uncomfortable with uncertainty. Uncertainty reduction occurs when people explore what or who they are uncertain about in order to gain more information. Young adults explore a career through different experiences or research before choosing a path. A study on the relationship between family interaction trends and career decision-making self-efficacy by Whiston found that students who were more entangled with their families are more likely than those who were not to experience difficulties in making career decisions. Next slide, please.
Okay, so methodology, how we went about this. So first we obtained consent through Longwood University's Institutional Review Board to conduct the study. Second, we conducted 11 interviews with young adults, generally college aged, or recently graduated from college a year or two out, on the factors that they believe led them to making the decisions that they did in the future. So lastly, we reviewed the data. We stored our interview transcripts, audio recordings, in Google Docs and Google Drive. We couldn't conduct the interviews in person like we wanted to, so all of our interviews were conducted via Zoom, and we saved those onto a common Google Drive to review later. Next slide, please.
For our results, we had a theme that said many of our interviewees noted a pressure from outside forces to attend college, a trade school, or join the military post-high school. The majority of our participants listed the most pressure to attend college. Participant 7 said, "I definitely felt pressure from society to go to college. It wasn't really seen as an option. It was more of the next step after high school."
Okay, so the second theme that we noticed, so some of our interviewees said that the previous work or life experiences helped determine what career path they wanted to pursue. So participant 4 said, I did have a summer camp counseling position for a little while, and that taught me how to lead. So I guess in some ways that helped. And participant 3 said, my retail job taught me that I did not want to work in retail. Next slide, please. Cool.
For our first limitation, some of our interviewees were conducted over the phone, so we were unable to read body language. And then for our second limitation, the amount of interviews were limited to 11, and if we interviewed more people, responses could have more accurately represented young adults.
And lastly, we interviewed young adults from one region of the country, which does not represent the experiences of the rest of the U.S. population. So somebody that lived in, say, the Midwest, or maybe a city, all of those could have different experiences. Next slide, please. Okay, so discussion. Location and upbringing have major impacts on the path people follow. Like I said, depending on where you grow up in the country and the world, could have a major impact on what you see as available or realistic for you later on. So implications of that, many participants do what is expected from them based on expectations of where they are and how they were brought up. So the second theme that we saw, most of our participants decided on their career path while they were in college. So one of our participants, participant number 10, noted that one of their best friends, they came in undecided. One of their best friends was taking a lot of classes that they loved. So she ended up switching to that major because of the classes that that her friend was experiencing. So the implications of this, most participants did not discover their career path until they explored different passed while they're in college. And based on this finding, we concluded that students are exposed to a variety of experiences in high school that may that desire their career path sooner. Next slide, please.
For future research, our first recommendation is to collect data from young adults from different regions of the country for more diverse perspectives. Our second recommendation suggests that you interview the participants in person so the researcher can easily note any nonverbal cues. For our last recommendation, we recommend the researcher collect data from those who chose to not go to college. Next slide, please. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our research today.
In this moment, a sense of revelation. My soul was bound, my future. It was stolen, but I found it. I found my intuition, my purpose solely written in your story. Something's coming up for me. Yes, something's coming up for me. Let it rise. Let it rise. Something's coming up for me. Yes, something's coming up for me. Let it rise. Let it rise. Wandering, seeking you, a passionate heart ensues. The fire's in our eyes. Something's coming up for me. Yes, something's coming up for me. Let it rise. Let it rise. Yes, something's coming up for me. Yes, something's coming up for me. Let it rise. Let it pieces of my soul withdrew, colored in a state brand new. Now that I know the truth, my heart is alive.
Hi, my name is Connor Hagen,
And I'm Emma Giambalvo.
and this is our research project on the preferred news outlets. Next slide, please.
We decided to choose our topic so we could see how 18 to 26-year-olds receive their news and on which outlets. Our study measured which platforms work best for this demographic, which is 18 to 26 people that are 18 to 26 years of age. Next slide, please.
The theory, in the study, we incorporated notes of agenda setting theory to see if the media could influence its viewers. Agenda setting is the theory as if news outlets play a role in portraying certain political issues as if they are more important than the next by broadcasting the subject more often, being what issues did respondents follow more, and have they been following one issue more than the other, is what the study wanted to ask. Next slide, please.
So for our methodology, the main method we used was sending the survey out on social media, targeting 18 and 26 years old people that are 18 to 26 years of age. The post was compiled of a link and a caption stating to only take the survey if respondents fell under that age group. Our second method was sending out the link through private messaging and text messaging. Also, the communications department at Longwood sent out our link on their Twitter account. And then the third method was just plain word of mouth. That was consistently used throughout the time period that our survey was sent out. So we just asked our friends, peers, and colleagues to take the survey for us. Next slide, please.
Our results, one of the trends that we had was only 26% of the people that took the survey said that they prefer traditional news outlets, which were some examples, TV, radio, or a newspaper, over any other platform. We kind of thought that the reason behind this is because it's easier to retrieve news on your phone than on a time slot on TV, such as Channel 12 News at 11 or something like that. They could just pop it up on their phone, like on social media. 50% of the people that took the survey said it was easier to find their news on Facebook rather than television news. And we figured the other 50% were people who don't use or don't have Facebook, so they might have just picked television as their answer. Next slide, please.
For our discussion, since our participants answered that they prefer traditional news over any other platforms, and almost 50% of our participants answered that it was easier to find their news on social media, it was concluded to be the favorable outlet. Our study showed that the respondents preferred social media in total over television to find their pop culture news as well. And then our second trend is our participants answered that they followed updates on the coronavirus or COVID-19 mostly on social media. Although our respondents said they trust traditional news outlets more, they still followed COVID-19 on social media, which we thought was an interesting trend. And we were able to send this survey out by the time COVID-19 was all over the news, so that was really interesting as well. Next slide, please.
Our limitations, one of them being questions were not very correlated with each other. There was a question about pop culture, and then there was other ones that were about gender, so they weren't, obviously weren't correlated very, well. Another one was limiting our first hypothesis to only a couple of our questions. The other one is not enough room for other generations to be able to participate. The response boxes were too open, which left room for non-relevant information. Next slide, please.
And then for our future research, we think future research can focus on broadening our age range in general and or to another of our study of different age groups as well, just to open that up and broaden it more. And then to see if the generations can compare. So we would want to see if the younger generation that we tested could compare to an older generation. We want to see if that can be studied for how they use social media altogether and not just focusing on politics like we did. More pop culture news, maybe things on food trends or fashion trends or anything like that. And then our last one is to test different hypotheses, to come up with new hypotheses that are based on the other future research that we would like to do. And so that concludes our presentation for our study. We want to thank the Longwood Communications Department for helping us with our presentation and our research. Thank you.
Are you the everlasting one? Will you ever?
Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Kenyon.
And my name is Rebecca Biersack, and our topic is reverse culture shock effects on study abroad students. Next slide, please.
First, we're going to begin with the topic of our study. Our research is on the concept of reverse culture shock, or also known as RCS, and its effects on Longwood University's study abroad students. The purpose of our study was focused around further researching RCS and how exactly it pertains to these students. This research is also to provide Longwood students with possible benefits that can come from these educational experiences, as well as to make them aware of these positive cultural, social, and cognitive changes that can occur. The research questions that guide our research are: how does reverse culture shock affect study abroad students after their return home? What factors enable or aid RCS? And also, what types of impacts from reverse culture shock will have an impact and cause changes in study abroad students? Our hypothesis for this study was that the phenomena of reverse culture shock would, in fact, have an impact and cause changes in study abroad students. Next slide, please.
Continuing with the standard formation of our research, the main theory that connects our research is Bandura's social learning theory. Here are some of the theory's implications. This theory focuses on two types of behaviors that can be researched on individuals: environmental and cognitive. In regards to reverse culture shock, this theory determines how these individuals feel emotionally, physically, and psychologically. Next, we will discuss the methodology. Next slide, please.
Within the methodology portion of our research, we used three major categories that help guide our study. These included the requirements of our participants, our research procedure, and also the method we use to analyze our data. The requirements for our participants include being a current student or alumni of Longwood University, between the ages of 18 and 25, abroad for 2 or more weeks, and also use this trip for an educational credit. For our research procedure, we started off by contacting students and alumni that we believe would fit the criteria that we had set. Next, we conducted 15 individual interviews via Zoom that consisted of 17 open-ended questions. As for our method to analyze our data, we used a content analysis that not only aided our thematic approach, but also created a platform to guide us with transcribing interviews. Next slide, please.
Here, I will talk about the results of our study and the three main themes that were prevalent throughout. First, emotional changes. Answering research question number 3, participants described having a number of emotional changes when experiencing reverse culture shock. These feelings include sadness, reminiscing, and gratefulness. Second, physical changes. Answering research question number 1. These changes include loss of routine, sense of jet lag, and restlessness. And third and last, we found a theme of social changes, which answers our research question number 2. These changes include feeling more culturally informed, socially cognitive, as well as understanding the differing values and norms of a new country. Next slide, please.
Moving on to our discussion section, there were 2 evident findings that we discovered off of our 3 themes. A number of themes relay a positive impact as a result of their experience. We discovered that study abroad trips can not only prepare students for future travels abroad, but also can culturally inform them to new areas and new ways of life. On the other hand, we discovered that study abroad experiences can also cause negative impacts on participants. We discovered that these negative emotional and physical impacts could possibly make students aware of the phenomena and also influence them to not want to participate in the future. Connecting these findings back to our guiding theory, we discovered that Bandura's social learning theory identifies possible ways to increase the positive impacts that were experienced and also decrease the negative impacts of RCS on these students. Next slide, please.
Now I will discuss the limitations of our research itself. There are 4 in total. Number 1, portions of our questionnaire lacked a general definition to the keyword of our study, which is reverse culture shock. 2, we had a limited sample of interviewees, which equates to a decreased validity in the results. Number 3, there were limitations to the face-to-face interviews, making it difficult to find study abroad students to interview. And third, the length of our interview itself may have decreased overall motivation to participate. Next slide, please.
When looking into future research that could be conducted about this topic, we recommended the idea of using non-academic participants. We believe that this may lower the chance of unwanted bias in the answers, or also increase the objectivity to the answers needed for the study. In addition, after conducting our study with all females, we believe that doing future research with a variety between male and female would provide increased perspective and also a more in-depth understanding of these impacts to all genders.
We would like to thank you all for your time and attention, and we hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
My soul's awakened, energy, I can't contain it. Life has been invigorated in total surrender. Oh, oh, I'm captivated by another dimension. I've never felt this way before. I'm captivated by a love never ending. This is worth fighting for. This is worth I'm captivated by another dimension. I've never felt this way before. I'm captivated by a love never ending. This is worth fighting for. I'm captivated by another dimension. I've never felt this way before. I'm captivated by a love never ending. This is worth fighting for. This is worth darkness of this age can be hard to fight. May need some aid, bearing brown in mind. Oh, in the night, withstanding trials with truth. 'Cause you give me strength, your will my soul pursue. Nothing now to lose, standing firm in you, only in you.
My name is Autumn High, and with me today is my partner, Sierra Corprew. Today, we will be discussing the mental impact of colorism on college students within the Black community. Next slide, please. Okay, so our research topic, obviously, is colorism. So what is colorism, or also known as shadeism? It's basically, in simpler terms, the discrimination within one's race. This issue normally tends to affect the Black community in a very negative way. Thus, with this research, my partner and I would like to analyze and investigate this issue further to understand the main catalyst of this issue. Next slide, please.
The theory that was chosen to help conduct this research was the critical race theory, which argued how race and prejudice can be seen within one's own society. The theory helped frame our understanding by showing us that racism has always been around and will continue to be around if we continue to do racial acts not only towards other races but within your own race. Next slide, please. How we went about conducting this research is that we had 11 participants of Longwood University ranging in ages 18 to 21, 8 females and 3 males. Out of those interviews, there were 4 that were considered dark skinned and there were 7 who were considered light skinned. Of those interviewees, we had all of our interviewees had natural hair and weight varied in height and weight. And due with the recent pandemic that crossed our nation, we could not conduct this interview face to face, so we did via FaceTime or phone call. Next slide, please. As a result of those interviews, we found that all of our participants experienced some form of colorism at some point in their life, receiving comments such as "You'll be pretty if you're light-skinned," "You're pretty for a Black girl," and things along those lines. A next trend would be the privilege. All interviewees felt that they don't receive or have privilege due to the color of their skin. Person 1 states, "As a Black female, privilege is not always given to me. There's this thing called light skin privilege in which a saver Black person is easier for white people to talk to." And our last trend would be the encounters with racism. A form of racism can also come from those outside of your race. Person 3, who was complimented on having good manners and how it's not common to see that, saw that as unusual and offensive because it makes it seem like all Black people don't have manners. Next slide, please.
So now we're going to get into the discussion. But before I go ahead and start, I just want to let you guys know, why is colorism important? Well, colorism, as stated prior, is negatively going to affect an individual's mental state. And that can sometimes force people within the same race to discriminate against each other. This is an important topic because many minority college students suffer unnoticeable mental traumas. And that can also impact one's physical development, communication skills, academics, and other extracurricular studies. With that being said, my partner and I's initial research question is, what is the persistent cause of colorism within college students in the Black community? And how does this affect one's mental health in society? Now, diving into that a little bit further, I just first would like to show you guys trend 2. Basically, here are some examples of discrimination from other races. Implications such as the following. You are much more articulate than I thought you would be. Dark skins are so mean, but light skins are much nicer. Dark skinned girls have nappier hair, but light skinned girls have nicer hair textures. These are all examples of what racism and even colorism can look like in the world of discrimination. Now, moving on to trend 1. Do you happen to witness colorism present on Longwood's campus? Many minorities feel like as if they do. But this is just a question to the audience. Let this topic bring awareness to you and begin to think about the individuals from various cultures suffering from racism within their own race. Next slide, please. Now we're going to move on to some limitations that we had. I'm going to point out the main 2 since these were the main 2 limitations that we struggle with the most. So we had a certain amount of interviewees that we were able to interview. Along with that, we were limited to Longwood University students in general. So with that being said, we could only have these or conduct these interviews with Longwood University students. Next slide, please. So in doing some future research, my partner and I gathered that it would be very interesting to conduct this research further on a younger age range. With that being said, we do believe that colorism is something that can derive from the household. And as one grows up and one gets older, they usually tend to brush the idea of colorism off their shoulders as if it was not an issue at all. So we would really like to see what that effect is and how that affects the younger generation. Secondly, we would also like to conduct this research on individuals within the majority community. With that being said, yes, as although colorism is more predominant in the minority community, we would like to try this experiment on the majority community and just see if there are any issues or anything like that that might be underlining or also could cause some internal discrimination within that race. And lastly, we would like to conduct a research on a specific gender relative to this study. Now, of course, this is still going to narrow it down to the minority community, but we wanted to separate it from male versus female, just to see which side or which gender in particular is going to be witnessing colorism the most. Well, thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you so much for listening to our research study.
Just to know that you are near shows your loyalty. Lifted out from my weakness into your glorious light. The light that shines forever, shines forever. You are the light in the darkness. You are the hope to the hopeless. I will not be afraid, not be afraid.
Hello, I'm Connor, and along with my partner, Susanna, we took to Twitter to find out how professional female athletes are portrayed and why people follow them. So like I said, our research topic was about professional female soccer players, and we wanted to know why people follow them on Twitter. So our hypothesis was people are more likely to follow these professional female athletes on Twitter because of their appearance and not skill. With this, we had a research question that said during the fight for equality between female soccer players and men, that people were more likely to follow these female soccer players because of their appearance and not their fight for equality. Now, when doing our research, our first theory we used, next slide, please. 2 slides, I forgot about that. Social media. So social media cultivation theory says that people are more likely to be influenced in their perception of reality by a longer exposure to social media. And this can be seen by you following a professional athlete or your favorite social media influencer, and you buying a product they support or an idea they support. Now, this is important for female athletes, and an example, professional female soccer players here, because if people online on Twitter, for example, are speaking about how they're portrayed and everything, they might have a bad idea about who they are and their image. Next slide, please. The second theory we used was self-categorization theory. And this theory says how people perceive themselves in groups as well as how these groups are perceived as a whole. Now, this is important for professional female soccer players because their image on Twitter might be associated with this perceived image of their group, and that's just not okay. So we were looking at how these groups were categorized as well. Now, to conduct our research, next slide, please. Sorry. To conduct our research, we took to Twitter and we used an age group as 18 to 26. So once we established these rules, we had created a survey with proper questions for this group. To send our survey out and advertise it, we use Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, as well as we send it to friends and family to get our survey out. Using what we did to get our survey out, we collected the data about our hypothesis and research question, and Suze is going to talk about that now. So next slide, please.
So for our results, for our hypothesis starting off, it was people are more likely to engage with female soccer players based on their appearance, not their skills. And this we proved to be correct, as seen in the chart below. And then for our research question, during the fight for equality for the U.S. women's national team, did they gain more followers because of their physical appearance, or did their followers stand by the idea of equality? And for this, we didn't collect enough data to back up this research question. Next slide, please. So for our discussion, starting off with the hypothesis again, people tend to follow professional female soccer players because they find them physically attractive. In our research, we found that 84 out of 132 people, which is 64%, this is the amount of people that follow professional female soccers on Twitter because they find them attractive. And then going into our research question, our research showed that a majority of people agree or strongly agree with the gender equality in sports being important, but we didn't see a correlation between gender equality and why these people follow the athletes on Twitter. So people did not follow female soccer players on Twitter due to them caring about equality. Next slide, please. So we found 3 limitations in our research. The first one is not asking enough questions in our survey to answer our research question. So we only asked one, and it's if people believe that gender equality in sports is important. And then our second is the ages of those who took the survey. So our target age group was 18 to 26 years old, and this limited our age group a lot. So maybe next time we'd broaden the ages. And then our third is the demographics of our research. Again, due to the people, since we had such a small target age group, it limited the data again. Next slide, please. So for future research, we had 4 recommendations that we would implement. Our first one is mentioning the target age group when posting the link for our survey on social media. So we failed to mention this. We only mentioned for people to take the survey if they had a Twitter account, but we ended up having to delete 50 responses out of 132 because these people were over the age of 26. So their data wasn't helpful towards ours. And then our second is ask more questions pertaining to our research questions so we could have collected more data for it to find a definite answer. And then the third is get more people that follow professional female soccer players on Twitter to take our survey. So we actually didn't really get that many people to take our survey that actually follow professional female soccer players. So it would have been better, and we could have gotten better information if they did. And then our fourth is to ask more questions on the reasons people follow professional female soccer players in general, just because we think it would be interesting to find more information about that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
can feel you in my soul. I'm high on your love, oh. There's something in the way you move. It's got me going, going. And I can feel you in my soul. I'm high on your love, in this moment, a sense of revelation. My soul was bound, my future. It was stolen, but I found it. I found my intuition, my purpose only written in your story. Oh.
Hi, my name is Annika Klein, and my partner Trevor Heath and I did our presentation on the culture of airline travel for generations Y and Z. Our research topic was how generations Y and Z view air travel and the air cultural travel that surrounds it. This topic is a phenomenon that is evident in airports and more notably social media platforms such as Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and Facebook. Much of this phenomenon is the result of social media influencers and the popularity of travel rising and becoming more frequent. The importance of studying this phenomenon is to explain how airlines do or could potentially do to market themselves to Gen Y and Z, to see how passengers view acceptable and unacceptable behavior and practices on airports, and how social media and social media influencers have influenced this phenomenon and why they appeal to Gen Y and Z. Our research question was, how has the rise of influencer marketing played a role in culture surrounding air travel? Next slide, please. The theory we used was social learning theory, which is best described as observation learning, which made it the most applicable theory for our study. We use this theory when looking at how people in the airline traveling public understand and recognize acceptable and unacceptable behaviors for flying, to understand what influences people to fly, to determine what developments the airlines have made in the past decades, and to understand how and why Gen Y and Z are influenced. Next slide, please. For our methodology, we had 8 interviews. We did individual phone interviews. We began with conversation before moving to questions, and we asked 11 questions. We recorded the interviews to then compare the results and to transcribe and analyze them. Our participants had to have certain requirements, so all had to be enrolled in a college institution or school of higher learning. They had to have flown in the last 5 to 10 years, and they all were members of Gen Y and Z. Our participants also told us their personal experiences and stories of traveling and flying, and they also told us what social media they use / what social media influencers they follow. Next slide, please.
For our results, we noticed 3 main trends with our study. One being that airline travel was typically too expensive for most of our participants. Another being that different opinions were found regarding delays and cancellations. Most people did not prefer delays. Only 2 of them tended to actually become very upset with them and had to deal with them a lot. Some of the participants who travel more frequently did state that they deal with delays pretty often, so they're almost used to it at this point. And the third trend being that there's different reasons why people fly. The top 3 being for business, vacation, or just visiting family. Next slide, please. For our discussion section, there were 2 trends that we'd like to note. One being that the importance of understanding why airlines do have a culture, how people are behaving, and where they learn what is and isn't acceptable behavior for flying on commercial airlines. Why people view air travel as more of a luxury, and also why people view it as just a means of transportation, especially for 2 of our participants that fly for work each week. The other trend was how social media influencers have made such an impact over the last few decades on airline travel, especially in generations Y and Z who are more active on social media and that do follow social media influencers that either travel frequently or do certain types of branding for travel websites. Next slide, please. For our limitations, we broke it down into participant experience, interviews, and scheduling. For participant experience, we found that it is going to have to be within the last 5 or 10 years that you'll have to find people that have flown within that period of time in order for this type of survey to even take place. Because a lot of them, if they're over 10 years from flying, a lot of things have changed. Or they were just too young to remember a lot of the experience. The second being interviews. The interviews had to be conducted through the phone opposed to in person for our situation. However, in the future, I do feel that doing these in person, either in focus groups or at least one-on-one, would be a lot more beneficial to more authentic answers for this type of cert study. And then for scheduling times and availabilities with our participants was also difficult, working around their work schedule and our work schedule. So depending on how your availability is, if you were to do this in the future, dealing with college students or college age individuals and young adults, scheduling could be a potential issue. Next slide, please. And for future research, we were only able to gain 8 participants for our survey, so more participants would probably yield better results in the future. We do recommend a group setting is probably the more ideal way of doing this, either focus groups or at least doing it one-on-one in person. And that way participants have the ability to bounce their opinions and ideas off of one another and build on their statements. The ability to adapt to trends and determining how airlines are able to continue to adapt and utilize trends on social media and in general, and then airline appeal, helping airlines to find ways they can appeal to more of the general public. So more of these surveys and research studies might actually benefit commercial air travel altogether. And thank you.
everyone, my name is Paige Spencer.
And I'm Whitney Sellinger.
Thank you for coming to our research presentation. We are very excited to share with you all our results that we have found throughout this process. To begin, we would like to say that we have obtained IRB certification from Longwood University to conduct this study and to interview our participants. We conducted our research study on college students and the identity portrayal on varying social media platforms. Next slide. Our topic was both social media and discovering the trends among users and the platforms they use, as well as how they have built the platform in comparison to other platforms they use. We used Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, and LinkedIn and labeled them as our big five throughout our research project. We took other platforms into consideration, but did not include them in our project as well, as we felt like they would not contribute as greatly to our project as the others. Next slide. One of the two theories that we chose to use in this research project is the social impact theory that states that the amount of influence a group has on the individual depends on the intimacy of the group, the strength or power of said group, and the number of people exerting social influence in the group. This contributed to our concept of the normalization of identity variation. A question we developed in light of this theory to ask our participants is, how important is your identity to you on social media? Next slide. The second theory we chose to use is the social comparison theory. This theory states that people base their own personal and social worth based on how they stack up against others. We used this theory throughout our research process as a way to emphasize self-awareness on social media. This was an important aspect of our research process and was referenced multiple times throughout our study, including in reference with our participants' use of multiple platforms. Additionally, we saw this theory used within the trends and themes that we discovered in our participants' responses. Next slide.
Our participants were required to be in a 4-year college undergraduate program with at least 3 of the big 5 social media sites, and they must have had a LinkedIn. Our procedure included contacting both students from Longwood and surrounding universities in Virginia. We believed that these people would fit the requirements, and we went about interviewing them. We held a total of 11 interviews and asked a total of 11 questions. We interviewed our participants via FaceTime, Zoom, and face-to-face. Our analysis method was using a systematic approach to identify and analyze different themes in our participants' responses. Next slide. The first theme that we saw within our results showed us that college students' personalities actually differ between social media platforms. With this comes a demand for different levels of professionalism between each platform. A majority of our participants stated that they believe that their personality differs between social media platforms. The second theme that we found was the impact that online relationships had on offline relationships. We found that our answers depended on how much social media mattered to them. A surprising 50% of our participants stated that social media actually did have an impact on their in-person relationships. Next slide, please. Additionally, we found a third theme that uncovered the most commonly used social media platforms by college students. Snapchat and Instagram were found to be tied for first, with Facebook and Twitter following behind them. 25% of our participants, which was found to be mainly seniors, stated that they actually use LinkedIn on a less regular basis. Following this, our final theme centered around the idea of online and offline personality representation. A majority of our participants stated that they present themselves the same online and offline. However, we did find that some of our participants claim that they do tend to be a little bit more confrontational online. Next slide, please.
This study is important because it discovers the inactive and active personality traits that we all use on social media. Because our participants said that they were more confrontational online, we can see these personality traits being expressed. Additionally, we wanted to follow along with the necessities for criteria, which guided our study as well as our group participants and allowed us to develop our research questions and method of analysis. Finding these themes and trends within the social media users based on these criteria allowed us to better understand the reasons why users use social media in the first place. Next slide.
The biggest limitation that we found throughout our research project was actually the lack of participants. Because of this, we were not really able to get a very large sample size or make inferences about college students as a whole. The second limitation that we found were the other social media sites that we chose not to include in our project. As we stated, we did only use the big 5. These other ones are mentioned by a few participants, even though we did not decide to study them. This is a major limitation because we did not account for the fact that nowadays there are a few new and rapidly growing social media sites such as TikTok. Next slide, please. We believe future research can be more extensively conducted by running a focus group. By running a focus group, this gives the participants the opportunity to bounce ideas off of one another and actually come up with more intuitive responses. In addition to this, we also recommend focusing more in depth on the use of the social comparison theory. This would give participants a chance to discuss how they view themselves stacked up against other social media users instead of really just looking at how they view themselves online and offline. We also suggest focusing on one college rather than looking at various colleges in order to identify the numerous patterns and themes at each college's locations. Thank you all for listening today, and we hope you all have a great day.
I've been waiting for you to come. I've been longing for you, I know. And I've been saying forever you've been on my mind. I've been waiting for you too long to see that you're the one that I want. And now my sight restored with an open heart. I found my way. Light rises, shakes the night, creation's moving. Can you feel it all around you now? A whole world of wonder, oh, oh. A fascination set into motion, a swell of grace immersed in love. The only place where all that surrounds you loses control. I'm captivated by another dimension. I've never felt this way before. I'm captivated by a love never ending. This is worth fighting for. My soul's awakened, energy, I can't contain it. Life has been invigorated in total surrender. Oh, oh, I'm captivated by another dimension. I've never felt this way before. I'm captivated by a love never ending. This is worth fighting for. I'm captivated by another dimension. I've never felt this way before.
Hey everyone, my name is Patrick Sanderson, and this is my project partner Justin Rapoli, and our presentation is on the decline of print media, paving the way for digital journalism. Next slide, please. So our research topic is the decline of print media, and the advances in technology over the past 2 or so decades and the rise of social media has completely altered the way people consume news nowadays, the traditional type of news being newspapers and so on. As major news outlets such as the Washington Post and New York Times have begun to make this transition, it's become easier for consumers to easily access local and national news. So we explored in this study the factors in which led to this rise of digital journalism and the decline of print media, and answered the questions: how has the transition changed the way people consume news, and what does it mean for the decline of print media, and what does it mean for the industry in the future of news consumption? Next slide, please.
The theory that we utilized the most during our research was the mass communication theory, which focuses on the rapid growth of new technology and how we understand and interpret that impact of the new technology. Ever since 1994, television has been the primary source of news consumption, that's attributed to the quickness in relaying of the news. And those who grew up in an era of print news are more likely to continue to prefer the old school method of news consumption and communication. Next slide, please.
So for our methodology, our participants, we interviewed 8 participants in total. The participants ranged from former students to faculty members at a mid-sized East Coast university, and all participants have experience in digital media, local national news, and digital journalism. This was to provide a wide array of answers based on our research. The interviews were conducted via phone call or video call, such as Zoom or Skype, and each participant was asked a base set of 10 questions, including some follow-up questions based on the answers given. For our data analysis, all interviews were promptly uploaded and transcribed to highlight key findings, and then used to create some theories based on the research. All had familiarity with the top 3 social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Next slide, please.
Our results conclude that news consumption is highly dependent on the market size. News at a national level covers information regarding the country as a whole and appeals more to large markets such as cities like New York and Chicago. Local news, however, covers information at a much smaller level and only applies to people in smaller communities. We deducted that print media, especially newspapers, are reliant on subscription fees and ad space for the revenue. Newspapers are typically more accurate due to the fact that they operate on a 24-hour news cycle produced by credible sources. However, print media offers fewer resources of information that digital media does. Next slide, please.
So in conclusion, we concluded that the technological advances has significantly altered the news cycle. Newspapers typically operate on a 24-hour news cycle, sometimes weekly or even monthly. This allows digital media to be the constant by-the-minute news source for a lot of consumers, which gives them an advantage over print media, which leads into the prioritizing of digital media. These news processes consist of newspaper stories going online first. So for example, if there's breaking news in a local community, the outlet will utilize digital platforms to get that breaking news out first. And then the newspaper will publish a longer piece with more details the next day. Next slide, please.
Some limitations that we encountered during our research process consist of interviews having to have been conducted over the phone or video call due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and thus created a barrier for communication. We found a lack of statistics provided on the topic, but the statistics that we were able to find provided prevalent trends which yielded useful results. Additionally, my partner and I were unable to discuss our content face-to-face and had to rely heavily on digital and online communication. Next slide, please.
So for future research of this topic, we could look at the relationship with technology and further focus on the individual's technology usage. What age demographics are using what? Are younger generations using digital media more? Are they using newspapers more? How relevant is print media? How relevant is it now? We touched a little bit on it in our research, but how relevant will it be 10 years from now? And see what the critics are saying about print media. The revenue is a big part of print media. The financial side really takes over a lot of print media, the advertising, the cost of printing, and so on. People paying for news. They rely heavily on the subscribers to pay for printing. And then look at the achievements of print media. Even though it's slowly declining, what is it keeping it alive? Will it still be alive 10 years from now? And then see what the individual preferences are. I touched on a little bit on this earlier, but what do people prefer to use? What do people prefer to look at? Do they prefer newspapers or do they prefer online platforms? That's the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for tuning in and stay healthy.
I'm finally here in your presence, where the noise of this world will fade. Now to be close to my Savior, a mystery that I can't explain. Lifted up from the ashes into your everlasting arms, where love will last forever, last forever. You are the light in the darkness, and you are the hope to the hopeless. And I will not be afraid, not be afraid. You've taken life to the highest high, and no more down in the valley. Just to know that you are near shows your loyalty. Lifted out from my weakness into your glorious light, the light that shines forever, shines forever. You are the light in the darkness, you are the hope.
Hello, my name is Julia Bird, and my partner Destiny Smith and I did our research on perceptions of body modifications in the workplace. Next slide, please.
Our research study aimed to reveal the overall perception towards individuals with body modifications in the workplace. Body modifications are a form of change done to the body, such as hair dyeing, piercings, tattoos, implants, and more. Next slide, please.
The theory used was Leon Fessinger's cognitive dissonance theory. This theory states that individuals experience a mental discomfort with things that are in conflict with their preferences. Therefore, people avoid contact with things that cause these discomforts. There are stereotypes held that individuals with body modifications are often linked to criminal activity or are thrill seekers. Therefore, if an individual holds this stereotype to be true, according to cognitive dissonance theory, they most likely avoid or disapprove of those with body modifications. Next slide, please.
We interviewed 12 people ages 18 through 66. Our interviews were mainly Caucasian and African Americans, and their only requirement was that they must have or had worked a job. We conducted our interviews over Zoom and FaceTime and recorded these interviews with voice memo apps on our phones. After the interviews, we transcribed them and conducted a thematic content analysis. The thematic content analysis helped us draw 3 themes. Next slide, please.
The first theme found is difference in age and body modifications. Of the 12 interviews, 9 of the participants had some form of body modifications. However, we found that these 9 participants were a younger generation, such as Generation X. 3 of the participants did not have any form of body modification, and all 3 are a part of the baby boomer generation. Those with modifications got them because it made them feel better about themselves and they liked the way that it looks.
The next theme is public-facing jobs and modifications. A recurring theme found in our interviews was that participants believe body modifications were a form of freedom of speech. However, companies still have the right to put restrictions on their employees when it comes to facing the public. A participant of the baby boomer generation stated, modifications may interfere with customers' comfort and turn away clients. We can see how cognitive dissonance theory plays a role in this theme when it comes to people avoiding what brings them discomfort. Next slide, please.
Our last theme is the overall perceptions towards individuals with body modifications. As you can see, our interviewees were shown 4 images of women with varying degrees of body modifications. They were then asked questions to get their overall perceptions. For image 1, all the participants said they would hire her and see no problems with her modifications. For the second image, participants of the younger generation still felt comfortable hiring her. However, those of the older generation started to see issues with her appearance. As the photos increased in body modifications, all participants said they would not hire these individuals because of presentation and inability to cover up these modifications. Within the interviews, we found that participants don't see a problem with modifications in the workplace as long as they can be covered up. Next slide, please.
In our research, we found that there is generational gaps when it comes to obtaining body modifications. Those with body modification were of younger generation and saw them as a way of expressing oneself. Older generation did not see any reasoning for getting modifications.
Our participants saw body modifications as a form of freedom of speech. However, workplaces should still be able to put restrictions on them. Previous research by Wendy Rima explains that pure speech is completely protected by the First Amendment. However, expressive speech is not protected by the First Amendment. Therefore, according to the perceptions our interviewees had, body modifications should be considered expressive speech. Next slide, please. Lastly, after showing our participant images of varying degrees of body modifications, the perceptions held were very clear. As the images increased in modifications, the perceptions were less and less approving. By the last image, all participants stated they would not hire this individual. We also see that there is a differing perception toward permanent and non-permanent body modifications. For example, ear piercings were accepted because they could be removed. However, tattoos were not accepted because they could not be removed. Lastly, by the last two images, none of the participants mentioned anything about her hair coloring, which is also a form of body modifications. Next slide, please.
We had a couple of limitations in our research. One limitation was the fact that everything had to be done virtually. Therefore, we had more access to younger generation than older generation. Therefore, we weren't able to get as many interviews as originally wanted. Lastly, the images shown went from very little modifications to pretty extreme modifications. In the future, an additional image with little modification would benefit the research. Next slide, please. For future research, researchers should strive to get more interviews with all ages and occupations. And additional research may benefit from interviewing individuals who hold hiring positions in the workplace to get better understanding on whose restrictions are placed on body modifications.
That will conclude our research presentation. Thank you for tuning in.
Hi, I'm Anya Dwyer.
And I'm Catherine Autry.
And we're presenting our research on weapons of persuasion and media literacy in Twitter users. So next slide, please.
So we are looking at the effect modern technology has on the way we communicate and how we value information communicated to us. This study is helping to determine this by studying the following hypotheses. Twitter users are more likely to read articles that are facts than opinions. And then our second hypothesis is that Twitter users are more likely to click and read an article with compliance gaining and Cialdini's principles of persuasion applied. Our next slide will be on theory and literature.
Next slide, please.
Please. So the theory we're using for this research is compliance gaining, which is the idea that humans respond to environmental stimuli predictably due to mental shortcuts. We have identified some constructs, the first of which is rhetoric, which is the strategic use of communication, oral or written, to achieve specific goals. Social proofing is the idea that people copy the actions of others in an attempt to undertake behavior in a given situation. Liking is the more you like someone, the more you will be persuaded by them. Next is authority, which things like accessories, titles, and knowledge lead us to believe that someone may be an expert due to their authoritative position. Reciprocation is giving a little to get a little in return. And finally, commitment is people want their beliefs to be consistent and with their values. Next slide, please.
Great. So methodology. So what we did was we surveyed people over the age of 18 who are Twitter users. And to get our survey out to people, we reached out to different Facebook groups, like different Longwood University classes, survey takers, friends and neighbors, our own personal social media platforms. And we used Google Forms to create the survey, where we installed fake tweets that we've created to learn about what people's perceptions of different tweets are. And we exclusively use Twitter. That's a limitation. So next slide, please.
So for our results, for hypothesis 1, which is people will be more likely to click on articles presented with facts and opinion, we found about 26% of people would read the article that was opinion-based, while 74% would not. And then 54% of people said that they would read the unbiased fact-based article, while 46.5% said they would not. And then as for our second hypothesis, with the utilization of Cialdini's principles, we found that around 6% of people said that they would read an article from a friend due to liking, while 33% of people said that they would read an article due to liking from somebody like Tom Hanks. Then we come with the commitment, and 60% of people said that they would read an article due to commitment, while only 3.7% said that they would read an article from Tom Hanks due to commitment. With reciprocity, 11% of people getting articles from a friend said that they would read the article, while nobody answered for Tom Hanks. For social proof, 23% responded that they would read it from a friend, while 14% said Tom Hanks. And lastly, authority. No person said that they would read an article from a friend due to authority, but 48% of people said that they would from Tom Hanks. Our next slide will be on the discussion. Next slide, please.
Great. So we had two really big takeaways from our survey. And the first was that Twitter users are way more likely to interact with an article that they believe is fact-based, based off that headline, rather than opinion-based. And when we asked them why, their biggest reasons were the source is unreliable, or the article was unreliable, or they're just not interested in reading about whatever the topic of that headline was. And then our other trend that we noticed was that Twitters are slightly more inclined to click on articles when Cialdini's weapons of influence are being used, specifically liking and authority were the two biggest. So next slide, please. So some of the limitations that we had were we had a low response rate. We only had 68 respondents, and we had to throw away 10 of those responses for being inappropriate or incomplete. And out of those 58 that were left, we had 83% of our respondents were Caucasian. So there was a real lack of diversity in our results. And our platform was limitation. We stuck with Twitter. And we also made a mistake in our survey where we forgot to include a demographic option. Next slide, please.
And finally, for future research, we have 4 suggestions. The first is to open this research up to multiple platforms to see the differences there. Our second is to look at visual and written communication over all platforms. Our third is to examine this on a much larger scale. Unfortunately, we were limited with our participant count. And finally, we suggest expanding on Cialdini's principles, solely focusing on the correlation between his 6 principles and online news influence. That concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know who you're supposed to be, but deep in my heart you'll always be. No weapon formed against me. I know you're always
Hello, everyone. My name is Jack Harmon.
And I'm Chase Fuller.
And we studied athletic impact, sports, and their effect on collegiate student bodies. Next slide, please. So our research topic, one of the most common programs found on all college campuses today is the athletic program. These programs are often utilized by universities as marketing agents, sources for alumni donations, and events to help bring campuses closer together. With so much emphasis on athletic programs, we wanted to test whether its impact is as large as advertised. So our study is focused on athletic programs and their effects on student enrollment and involvement on campuses. Next slide, please.
So for our theory and literature part, our main theory, to begin our study, we brought in a few different theories to help give our research a foundation to grow on, including the 2 following ones here. The first one being social exchange theory, which is negotiated exchanges between parties that supports social change altogether. And the second one being dialectal theory, which are all relationships are interwoven with multiple contradictions. Next slide, please.
So moving into our methodology, for our process and our research study, we conducted interviews, both in person and then over the phone, with 10 individuals who all fell under these criteria, which were current college attendees, that college is in the state of Virginia, and then the college has a Division I athletic program. And then for the interviews, after selecting the participants, we had around 20-minute interview sessions with each individual, asking them the same 12 questions, which we had approved beforehand. Next slide, please.
So the results from our overall interviews, our first trend that we noticed was the most prominent trend was that there is a direct correlation between the presence of athletic programs and students and their decisions to enroll at a particular university. 80% of our participants in the first trend found that the presence of sports on their college campus impacted their decision to attend that specific school. Our second trend was that we found that 100% of our participants cited having a specific reason for choosing their university. While the reason may not have been an athletic program like the first trend, it does give us insight into the enrollment decisions of college students as a whole, opening up their future avenues for research. Next slide, please.
Moving into our discussion or our so what section. So with 100% of our participants, they each cited having a specific reason for choosing their university. And this proved that decisions to attend universities are impacted by available incentives. While the reason may not have been an athletic program in some cases, it does give us insight into the enrollment decisions of college students, opening up future avenues for research. And universities can utilize studies such as this to help determine which programs they offer or which ones they offer to bring in their students and help strengthen their marketing efforts. Next slide, please.
So there, with this topic in our research and then through everything in our interviews, we did have some limitations. We found three main ones. The first one being obviously lack of in-person interviews with the amount of change that's going on with our classes in our school and around the world. Obviously, that's a big thing nowadays, is that we are not able to have as many in-person interviews as we would have liked. The second limitation was the number of total interviews. Obviously, another thing with the world changing as it is, you lose some participants that don't have as much interest in the topic as they would have when they were right down the street or in the same apartment as you. So that one was the second biggest limitation. And our third was just the ratio of overall involvement in our participants. So we wanted to try to get an even number. Obviously, we said we had our 10 participants, wanted to get 12 if we could, but we wanted to try to get a 5-and-5 split for men to women, but we were only able to get as close to having 7 men and 3 women as our interviewees. So that was our third limitation there. Next slide, please.
So going into future research topics, the first one we thought about was studying the programs that draw the most students to a particular university. The kind of research that we followed and we studied this semester really opened up different avenues that schools could look into when they're trying to get their next class of freshmen in. Is what do you push and what do you show them that you have to try and get more of them to apply and to commit to your school. And then the second is studying the effects that a winning athletic program can have on a college community. So we know that athletic programs can affect the community of a college campus and bringing students together, but what effect would it have if you knew that it was a winning athletic program? And I believe that is all. So thank you for listening.
That's all we got.
inside of you. Love poured out for my weakness. Oh, I've been waiting for you to come. I've been longing for you. I know, and I've been saying forever. You've been on my mind. I've been waiting for you too long to see that you're the one that I want. And now my sight restored with an open heart. I found my way.
Hey guys, I'm Michael Carpenter. And my partner, Joseph Leonarchus, and I, we studied the psychological effects on social media on young adults. Next slide, please. So, our research topic, we wanted to figure out why and how influencers, fitness Instagram influencers, use their Instagram pages to promote their fitness techniques and products. The influencers are highly impactful in the way that their followers think about themselves and their purchasing decisions. Next slide, please.
Okay, so first, right here, we're going to go into the theories. So the first theory we chose was the social influence theory, which explains why people do what they do and how they are coerced into doing so. We chose that one to help highlight our first hypothesis, which had a lot to do with purchasing decision. The second theory that we chose to use was the objectification theory. That posits that girls and women are typically acculturated to internalize an observer's perspective as a primary view of their physical selves. So this basically is just saying that a female would be more likely to believe what someone tells them about their looks. Next slide, please.
So a little bit about our methodology and how we did this study. So we wanted to study young people between the ages of 18 to 30 because these people are the majority of people that are on Instagram. So to reach this group, we tweeted out and posted the survey on social medias in our school organization group chats to hit this target population. So we started having a lot of female respondents, which is not a problem at all, but we wanted an equal representation. So we started to send our survey out to people in the men's football group chat, men's rugby group chat, for example, so that we would have more equal representation. So we also use a Likert scale in our survey because we wanted to get a range for when we're asking questions, we want to get a range of how likely are you to buy something or how likely are you to believe this, for example. And we asked all original questions in our survey, so they were specifically written to find the information that we wanted to figure out. So next slide, please.
So the next slide will be the results. For the first hypothesis, we found that there was a significant correlation between the products influencers promoted and then with the products bought by the followers. So the followers were more likely to buy the product if the influencer was not being paid to promote it. So basically, people are not going to want to buy something if they know you're only selling or trying to sell it to them because you're getting paid for it. They'd rather you be promoting the product because it's just a good product, not because you're getting paid to do so. So then we have the second hypothesis, which says the results from an independent samples t-test showed that males were more negatively affected by fitspiration than females. And this was actually a big shock to us because the objectification theory that we use to help us states that females are actually the ones that are more negatively affected. So that was pretty shocking to us. But next slide.
So now we're going to talk about what those hypotheses mean. So our first hypothesis was all about finding out the purchasing decisions and why people buy the things that they do. Do they buy things because that's what their influencers are promoting? And like, why is that? So we figured out that Instagram influencers have a lot of influence into the purchasing decisions of the people that follow their page. And for people who want to use our findings, online retailers and marketers would be very wise if they use influencers and pay influencers to promote their products or somehow get those influencers to promote their products. And we found that people trust the people that they follow more than the websites of the products. And we figure that this is because you see these influencers as your peers. So our second hypothesis, we found that these Instagram influencers they're promoting online much bigger effect they have much more effect on people than they realize. So this relates to Fitspiration, and it has a positive and a negative effect. So the positive effect would be that people are more motivated when they see these influencers. They're more motivated to look like these people and train to be like these people. It also has a negative effect, and they might be demotivated, thinking, I'll never look like this person. Next slide, please.
So then this brings us to the limitations of our research. The biggest, the most obvious of all of them would be the coronavirus. We weren't the only ones affected by this, but it definitely affected our research because schools closed, health and fitness center closed. We were planning on going around and asking people in person to try to get fill the survey out in person in the fitness center because we know all of them are active. But like I said, we weren't able to do that. The next one would be gender discrepancy. So we had a 60% rate of response rate from females. And it would be a lot better if we could have had that 50-50. Missed target population. Like I said before, we weren't able to go into the gym and actually ask these people and get them to fill out the survey like we would have wanted to. So then that brings us to the lack of participant identity knowledge as well, because the survey is online. Anyone can take it. We weren't able to just target people who are specifically active or physically active and into the fitness scene. So that was the only thing there. Anyone could take it. We're not sure. Next slide, please.
All right. So in the future, we would love to see that people continue our research and take our findings and take it a step further. So these are a couple of the ways that we really hope that people will go deeper into our research. We want to know why people buy supplements. Why do they do it? To benefit themselves or to impress others? We also want to dissolve the negative effects of Fitspiration and side effects. Its negative side effects. Next slide, please. And thank you guys for tuning in.
You are mine. Spirit come, fall on us. In your presence, God, I can't quite get enough. Breathing in your spirit, grace it fills my lungs.
Hello, YouTube. I am Brooke Roberts Massey Cheatwood, and this is my colleague.
Look at Mrs. Taylor. Hi.
And our project was on the cultural theory and perceptions of gun control. Slide, please. So this research topic, what is it? The purpose of this study was to explore how the average college-age student felt about firearm control in the United States. Why do we believe this matters? Well, we believe this matters for a plethora of reasons, but our main two are, as you can see on this slide, was to gauge how students really feel about their Second Amendment rights, as well as to see what constructed their opinions towards these rights and why do they have these opinions. Slide, please.
So the theories that kind of guided our research were the effect heuristic and cultural risk theory. Now, we believe that these kind of played hand in hand with what we were talking about. And to go into it, the cultural risk theory says that people that share the same culture or community, they will also share the same opinions or emotions of fear and risk that they are willing to take. Now, we believe that these emotions also played a role in the effect heuristic, which says that certain emotions create these shortcuts to get to a decision that is agreeable. Next slide, please. And so going on to find this, we decided to survey Longwood students. And we wanted anyone 18 or older, because that means they were eligible to own a gun. And then we also really wanted them to have a position on gun control, rather that be a strong on one side, strong on the other, or in the middle. But we wanted them to have a position that they believed in, because that means there was some preconceived notion and decision making into coming to what they believe in. And so we asked a group of participants, a total of 10, through Zoom and FaceTime calls that were also recorded. These participants, 7 were female, 3 were male, and this was to directly relate to Longwood University's male to female ratio. After we asked the questions, we reviewed the videos and analyzed to see if, when we were asking questions, if there was any verbal or nonverbal cues to see if there was an emotion being triggered. And then we went back to see whenever there was something like that happening, what emotion was being triggered. And we wanted to really find the roots of that emotion. So we went into it and we would research the participants' hometown and see how they believe on a position and directly correlate it with the actual participants. Next slide, please.
So as my colleague just touched on there, the 3 categories we had, as you can see on the slide, there is no gun reform, moderate gun reform, and extreme gun reform, and you can read the descriptions right below. But some of the quotes that we used to develop these categories were really interesting from what we have found. So my favorite quote that I found from the no gun reform category was, "We don't need new gun legislation when there are tons of laws that already exist not being practiced by anybody." This was from one of our first participants. Another quote that we used to form the moderate gun reform category was, "I come from a very urban area where my father works as a cop, and we believe people do not really need guns that hold magazines higher than 10 rounds. Quotes like this really fed into this moderate kind of group because they still believed at the same time people should have the right to own these firearms. While in the third category that we have here, extreme gun reform, the best quote that defined this category was, "I don't see any reason for people to own guns whatsoever. Is it not enough to rely on the police? Like, that's why they exist, to protect and serve us, the people." Next slide, please.
So we found that a lot of our participants' opinions and positions on gun control directly correlated with their communities or hometowns. And we believe that we could see this happening because when we would ask a question, we would see that there was a cue that our participants were creating a sign. If they heard gun control and public safety, an emotion was being triggered to come to a quick decision on the question. So after picking out those points, we found that those positions that those participants said directly correlated with their communities on what their positions would say. Next slide, please.
So some of the limitations that we were experiencing with this project was shaky internet connections, especially from our friends in rural areas, which kind of gave away to some of their nonverbals that were kind of hard to pick up due to that factor. Another limitation of this was it's a generally tough subject matter. People feel very hard which way they do fall, and they can have all sorts of emotional outbreaks, as well as there were not enough participants from either area to really weigh it out. And we also experienced a lack of diversity. We could have seen more Hispanic males as well as females, and African American males as well as females answer some of the questions that we had had. Next slide, please. And for future research, what I would like to see a little bit better is more balance within it. People who own guns versus people who don't own guns. It seemed that a lot of our participants really were just trying to chime in at the bit because they did own guns. Another interesting thing could be for legislatures to get involved, interview them. Law enforcement would be great, and different theories of communication could be used also to analyze this topic, such as social identity theory and framing theory. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To your spirit, open our hearts, Lord, open our hearts, Lord. Oh, come awaken us to your spirit, open our hearts, Lord, pour it upon us. Oh, come awaken us to your spirit, open our hearts, Lord. Let your light shine through, illuminate the darkness, flashes of grace surround us. I can't contain.
Hi, I'm Najma Jones.
And I'm Ashanti Green. Our research topic is Why Do You Finsta? An academic study of Instagram topic content. Next slide, please. Our research topic was how content on primary Instagram accounts and Finsta accounts differs based on creator preferences and gender. Our first hypothesis stated that the content posted on one's Finsta account will be more truthful or authentic than the content posted on one's primary Instagram account. And our second hypothesis stated that the content of Finsta accounts differs between male and female creators. Next slide, please. Theories used were social identity theory, which relates to how the Instagram Finsta creators perceive themselves when it comes to their select social groups, i.e., how they appeal to followers on their primary Instagram accounts and their Finsta accounts. Our second theory was identity management, which relates to how Instagram and Finsta users present themselves on each account, possibly adjusting content based on the respective followers used. Next slide, please. Methods. We gathered 110 participants who were all 18 to 25 years old. The requirements were they must have a primary Instagram account and they must have a Finsta account. We used an online survey posted to the following social media platforms: Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, and Facebook. We asked multiple choice questions based on the Likert scale, from a scale of strongly disagree to strongly agree. Our demographic questions were also used to tell race and gender. Next slide, please. Our results found that our first hypothesis was not supported. The results of the correlated t-test show that there is little information to support that creators use Finsta to post a more genuine version of themselves compared to their primary Instagram accounts. We know this because the higher average of our participants disagreeing that they used Finsta to be more genuine, having an average of 3.89 versus a low agreement of 3.31. Our second hypothesis was also not supported. The results of the correlated t-test showed that there is very little difference between the content posted by male and female creators. This is found for our numerical values when the content posted by male or female Finsta creators had an average of 3.52, while how masculine or feminine content is had an average of 3.23. Next slide, please.
So for our first hypothesis was not supported, meaning that Finsta users are not using their accounts to show a more authentic or true version of themselves as we originally thought. From our results, we can imply that Finsta accounts could be similar to real Instagram accounts instead. And these accounts just be another way to showcase a fake identity, but with a smaller, more personal group of followers. So from our literature review, our researchers claim that Finsta users utilized their accounts to expel their feelings and were largely associated with words like exposed, sad, and personal, but these results were the opposite of what we found as well. So we developed a post hoc analysis in which we were interested in exploring whether Finsta accounts were just extensions of Rinsta accounts and not actually all that different. And Rinsta accounts meaning real Instagram accounts. So for our second hypothesis, both genders spent about an equal amount of time preparing Finsta content, and male and female Finsta content didn't really differ as we originally thought as well. Our researchers and our literature review that we discussed told us the opposite of this too. Females tended to post more feminine content and males tended to post more masculine content. And so from there, we developed a hypothesis stating the difference in content based on gender. And so then we developed a post hoc analysis where we were interested in exploring if there was a difference in frequency, if there was a frequency of posting Finsta content based on gender. And so our researchers claimed that females tend to be more expressive, which might translate into more increased Finsta posts to display their feelings. Next slide, please. So we ran into a couple of limitations during our study. We used surveys and that heavily relied on self-reflection. So our results might not have been 100%. Also the time period we put the study out to, a lot of the other 460 classes were putting their surveys out as well. So participants might've felt a little bit overwhelmed. And then also gender, only 13% of our results were from men. So we weren't able to fully analyze them as well. Next slide, please. And then lastly, as we continue, if we were to continue this research, we could potentially analyze a younger age group, specifically 10 to 17. These groups are still developing their identities and they might use social media to navigate that. But minors would be involved, so that would be a limitation. And then we could also use a different theory, specifically the cognitive dissonance theory, to analyze how Rinsta and Finsta identities could potentially clash online. And that concludes our research study. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.
My heart is alive in you. Pieces of my soul withdrew, colored in a state brand new. Now that I know the truth, my heart is alive in you. Something's coming over me. Yes, something's coming over me. Yes, something. Something's coming over me. Yes, something's coming over me. Let it rise. Let it I don't know who you're supposed to be, but deep in my heart you'll always be. No weapon formed against me. I know you're always there. I'll always know you're
Hi, my name is Megan Serrani, and Brianna Evans and I researched two separate roles within the Instagram platform, Finsta and public accounts. Next slide, please.
For our research account, our research topic, we took an in-depth look on the communication phenomenon of how and why users display themselves on Instagram versus a Finsta. We connected theories, conducted a research study with users of Instagram and or Finsta accounts, and analyzed the responses to gain better knowledge to why users use the Instagram platform for two separate accounts. We had 3 research questions with our research. 1, how do users portray themselves in different ways on Instagram versus Finsta account? 2, what techniques do users use to edit within their different accounts of Instagram and Finsta? And 3, what types of interaction do users have with their followers within their Finsta account versus their Instagram account? Next slide, please.
Next, we have the theories that we use to further our research. First, we have the looking glass self, which is where individuals create a picture of themselves based off of verbal and nonverbal cues of others and how individuals will react to the world around them. Then we have social identity theory, which is how people want to maintain a positive social identity and communication. Third, social penetration theory, which is how relationships are composed of different stages of intimacy that depends on the amount of self-disclosure that is given. And lastly, self-disclosure theory, which helps understand what people reveal and why people reveal only certain parts of their personal lives. Next slide, please.
For our methodology, we had 3 sections. First, the participants whose ages ranged from 18 to 25 regularly used Instagram at least 5 times a week and use or follow an active Finsta account. The procedures, we obtained approval from the IRB. We prepared 22 interview questions, reached out to the participants via personal social media platforms, and we gave the participants options for Zoom or phone call interviews. We recorded each interview via Zoom or audio recording apps and transcribed it. kept recording and transcriptions our personal computer in our folder dedicated to interviews. Lastly, our interviews lasted 10 to 20 minutes. For our method of analysis, first we transcribed it. We transcribed any notes taken during the interviews. We identified themes, patterns, and concepts. We interpreted them by categorizing, sorting them, and lastly, we labeled the categories. Next slide, please.
Next is our results. We found 3 trends through the interviews that we conducted. First being the authentic self. This can be seen in Finsta users who feel more comfortable posting unedited and even embarrassing photos of themselves, opposed to their Instagram accounts, which is filled with aesthetically pleasing photos. Second is the best self. Schroeder and Kavanagh conducted a research study that found that users are able to alter social media post profiles to show them in a more positive light. And many of the participants that we interviewed stated that they edit their photos and go through a process of choosing the best photo to post of themselves on Instagram. And then lastly, we found is privacy. Finsta users limit who they allow to follow their Finsta account. Most of their followers are close friends that are trusted, and that allows them to feel more comfortable being their true and authentic self and post more emotional captions and even embarrassing photos. Next slide, please.
Within our discussion, we were able to answer all three of our research questions. Number 1, Instagram holds the unspoken rule of having candid, edited photos along with a smart, quirky caption. Finsta accounts allow their users to post any picture with no editing and no caption. Number 2, editing and the techniques used for different accounts differ because of how casual and relaxed Finstas are compared to a regular Instagram account. Female interviewees explain the large process they take in order to post a single post onto the Instagram, whereas for a Finsta, the editing process is minimum. And number 3, users of a Finsta treat their selected followers differently, as in more openly than Instagram followers are treated more professionally and given information that is edited and made better to the poster or account holder. Finsta followers have more of a friendly interaction and are exposed to more personal information. Next slide, please.
During our research, we faced a few limitations. First being we were unable to conduct face-to-face interviews and had to rely on Zoom. This limited the amount of nonverbal cues we were able to obtain from our participants. Second, our research topic may have deterred individuals from participating. Individuals may not want to divulge that they have a Finsta account or protect the privacy of the Finsta accounts that they follow. Third is the majority of the participants were female. We only had 1 male participant, which prevented us from getting a male's perspective on how they portray themselves on their Instagram account versus their Finsta account. And then lastly, the pool of participants was small and the researchers knew them personally, which may have deterred participants from being 100% truthful in their answers. Next slide, please.
For our future research, we had 3 recommendations. 1, include more male participants in the pool to create a more diverse pool. Number 2, content that is posted on Finsta and Instagram should also be considered when researching this topic. And number 3, further research is needed on why users feel they need both a Finsta and an Instagram account. Thank you.
Thank you.
Will you ever
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for welcoming us into your homes. My name's TJ Wingert, alongside my research partner, Rob Galloway, and this is our presentation on mobile technology use and its correlation to confidence and interpersonal communication skills. Next slide, please. So what our research is all about, we want to see if there was a correlation based off of different age groups and how much they use technology and how that plays into their interpersonal communication skills, how much confidence they have in maintaining a conversation. So based off of that, our hypothesis would be that younger groups who use technology more will have less confidence than those who are older and use technology less, while our second hypothesis revolving around individuals are more likely to maintain a conversation, whether it's a stranger or a friend, if they have admiration, meaning they have a physical attraction, or they are just somebody they look up to. Next slide, please.
So into our theory and literature, the theory we focused on was the uncertainty reduction theory, and we looked at it in more of a dyadic setting, so in a two-party involvement interaction, if you will. And what we wanted to do was actually argue against the uncertainty reduction theory, which the main premise stating that the goal between two parties in a dyadic setting, within their first interaction, their main goal is to reduce and ultimately eliminate that awkwardness, that awkward silence, and any uncertainty surrounding the interaction. And then the construct to focus on, TJ mentioned it, admiration as the variable considered by us to be the strongest in relation to continuing a conversation with a stranger. Next slide.
So for our methodology, it was quite simple. We made a survey and we targeted 5 different age groups, being 18 to 25, 26 to 35, 36 to 45, 46 to 55, and then 55 years old and over. And we made original questions to target those age groups, their use of technology and how frequent it is, their confidence in maintaining a conversation with a friend, a stranger, a friend they admire, as well as a stranger they admire. And ultimately, we posted this survey on Twitter and Facebook, as well as sending it through group chats, which was made up of people we went to church with, as well as colleagues that our parents worked with, to try to boost up the number of respondents, specifically of people who were 45 years old or higher. Next slide, please.
So here we have the results, and what you can see is that our numbers didn't exactly work out in our favor. Here we have the younger age group, 18 to 35, actually showing more confidence in maintaining a conversation in comparison to those who are 36 and older. And while those age groups while combined, can seem pretty broad, that older age group grew up amongst the development of the uncertainty reduction theory. So we assumed that they would have that motivation, that built-in experience to eliminating that awkwardness and the ability to carry a conversation and the confidence to carry a conversation. But what we found is that younger age groups actually felt more confident in carrying that conversation, and that this presence of mobile technology has not dwindled their interpersonal communication skills, but rather in the other direction. It's given this connection, this feeling that no one is really a stranger here, because we can connect with so many people around the world, and that continuing a conversation is near seamless amongst younger age groups. And then with our second hypothesis, this did work out in our favor, finding that admiration, again, whether it be physical attractiveness or more of a knowledgeable admiration to the person you are talking with, would carry a conversation compared to having a conversation with an individual with the absence of that admiration. Next slide, please.
So for our discussion, what Rob just basically talked about, mobile technology maybe hasn't ruined our interpersonal communication skills as much as we had expected, or maybe even the interconnectivity of mobile technology makes us stronger interpersonal communicators. So it backs up the uncertainty reduction theory, which it actually is almost 45 years old in itself, which still to this day proves to be true. And we had some semblance of proof with our second hypothesis. It did appear that individuals who were talking to someone they had admiration for are more likely to maintain that conversation or think of that conversation being willing to go a little longer and further into that conversation, but not enough information or statistical evidence to back it up and prove that it is credible quite yet. Next slide, please.
And for our limitations, of course, there's always some present. I think the most present we would have would be survey dishonesty. You know, people really like to think that they're leading their best selves and they want to present their best selves, and with no way to monitor how and the reasoning behind their answers, that leaves room for some fabrication. And of course, there's observational and environmental limitations, of course, with conducting a survey. And that creates barriers between our research and attaining the most organic results possible. You think you can carry a conversation on with a stranger you just met. Well, how likely can you do it? We want to see it. We want that visual proof. And then lastly, probably the smallest portion of our limitations would be user error. We were attaining attention from an older age group, wanted to see, some of those empty questions that we had to get rid of in order to make our statistics more accurate. How many of those are not completely understanding the format? We're reaching an older age group with new age mediums, and how else could we have gone about it to make sure we're getting the most organic results possible? Next slide.
So for future research, there's a couple of different ways this can be taken upon different researchers. One, you could do it in in-person settings, and this would allow researchers to examine conversations between different individuals and use their own eyes to gauge the strength of interpersonal communication, the eye contact, how often and how frequent somebody gets on their phone while in a conversation with somebody else. Or if you still want to stay with the survey route and reach more people as we did, maybe using it and targeting different geographical locations. We pretty much were stuck within those we knew, largely within the state of Virginia, as well as getting responses from older individuals, getting more of those responses, as well as not running it strictly through social media and group chats, which is run through a phone, which will inherently alienate certain age groups we would want to hear from in this kind of survey. But that brings a close to this presentation on interpersonal communication skills and how it's tied to mobile technology. I've been TJ Wingert. He's Rob Galloway. Stay safe, everybody.
Awesome. Well, thank you, TJ and Rob. Well done to you, but also well done to all the presentations today. Obviously, this has not been the easiest semester for everyone involved to do research here with the transition to online. So I think the work you saw today, the work you heard tonight is really a testament to our students' ability to persevere and power through challenges when it comes. So we in the comm department are very proud of all of them. Of course, we wish they were here doing this in person for you all out there in the YouTube land, but I think this worked pretty darn well. So for everyone behind the scene, Dr. Alec Osterman, Dr. Awesome, Mr. Clint Wright, Professor Jeff Halliday, the rest of the Communication Studies Department, I am Dr. Ryan Stouffer. We'll do this again next spring online for everybody in YouTube land. We'll see you again then. Stay healthy.
The darkness of this age, aching for my mind. I need your strength.